What have I learned from speaking with over 50 guys about their struggles, about the ups and downs of their growth journeys? Well, seeing as we've just surpassed 1 year of the Growth Voyage Podcast, I thought, why not dedicate an episode to all the lessons that I've learned along the way so far. Let's jump straight in. The way in which I'd love to start this is by touching upon depression, the super low moments in a man's journey. And the reason why is because I believe this point is heavily misunderstood, and this is stopping people from getting the answers that they want to. A big reason why depression is misunderstood, I think, is because it's seen as a bad thing. It's seen as something that we ought to avoid. Oh, you're feeling depression. Oh no, you're supposed to be happy. Which, in my personal opinion, I think there's another way. There's another way we can approach it. And again, this is just my experience, but I'd love to share what I've learned so far about this point in our lives. You can call it rock bottom, you can call it depression, whatever you want to do. This moment is usually triggered by a wake-up call. What I mean by a wake-up call is often because of the fast-paced nature of life, we're going through, getting stuff done. We hardly ever take time to listen to the signs that something in our life isn't quite right. We're reacting a certain way. We're perhaps going down a certain direction, but we never really stop and pause. And what this moment does, the depression, it forces us to stop. It forces us to feel, whereas usually we haven't been feeling. And a wake-up call, it can be caused by a loved one passing away, a career that your identity was heavily attached to is no longer there. You're made redundant, your business has died, you're no longer a sportsman, whatever it may be. These are just some examples. Perhaps a relationship has ended, you've been divorced, whatever it may be. There's been a wake-up call. This triggers the depression. I don't believe depression has to be a bad thing. I think it can be a very good thing and it can be a blessing. But sometimes it's only once we're out the other side we can see them as blessings, right? But it is when we are forced to really slow down and really reflect, that's when we can make the changes that we want to. Often at times, especially if you're an ambitious man, when you set an intention that you want a better life, that you want more for yourself, you're going to be met with challenges. You're going to be met with all sorts of stuff that's coming up. And this is because I believe this is the way, this is the path that you've got to follow. These are the challenges that you've got to get through in order to get where you want to be. And so this is why I find depression fascinating, because what's happened is we all have an ego, right? For a long time, I didn't really understand what the ego was. I thought, okay, if someone is boisterous or loud or rude, they've got a big ego. Oh, he's got a big ego. But we've all got an ego. And its job is to protect us. And often that's why I see sometimes the loudest people who have the most to say, who are quite rude to people, they've got a bigger ego, right? Because they often carry the deepest wounds from when they're younger, from their childhood. And what usually causes depression, in my view, is where our sense of self, our identity, has taken a beating. Let's put it that way. It's taken a beating because our perception of who we are, the perception of how we saw the world, that's been broken somewhat. So we go down and we're like, where am I? Who am I? That's the big question. Who am I without this career? Who am I without this person? And that's the big question. And that, I believe, is the question that we've got to find out while we're on this planet, is who actually are we? Because as soon as we're born, we're giving a name, we're giving a job, we're giving an identity. And then we take on our subjective experiences of the world, how we perceive love, what we're told by our parents, our surroundings, people in our lives. We take all of this on. And so when we experience these tough moments, all of these are brought to the surface, and you realize how subjective they were. Our perception of self isn't always represented by reality. In fact, what even is reality? This is why depression can be such a blessing, because before we were carrying unconscious wounds from childhood, and it's only when this moment happens we're forced to kind of deal with these emotions. We have to deal with these wounds that come up, and before then our ego is built on very fragile foundations, and that's why we've kind of been led to this place, this initially scary place of depression, because we're left with all this mess, all this unmet stuff. And this is why it can be very beautiful, because once we actually are given that opportunity to deal with the effects of this state of mind, that's when we can rebuild and we can start thinking about, who actually am I? Who do I want to be in the future? And I think it's so awesome to be able to then delve into the past and discover stuff. Okay, cool. Maybe I put my parents on a pedestal and I applied a subjective meaning to their words. Or at school, when this kid told me this, I carried that belief with me my whole life. There's all this stuff that is just an endless journey. There's endless points we can discover, endless things we can discover about ourselves. And so that's where I find it can get really, really exciting, this period of your life where you're starting to ask yourself these very important questions that you wouldn't have asked otherwise, because you haven't had that reality check, you haven't had that wake-up call. And it's only once we have the wake-up call we can start thinking about where we want to go, right? But often we don't get to the wake-up call, because instead of dealing with the shit, instead of dealing with the problem straight away, a lot of the time we turn to addiction, for example, or numbing, overworking. Certainly one I can relate to. And this is why our wounds will always, from what I've learned, our wounds will always be there. We can't just get rid of them. We can't just keep on going. They're going to manifest somehow. If it's not an addiction, it's going to be in disease. There's always going to be a way in which it manifests to the world. Relationship breakdowns is another great example. So by allowing ourselves to feel depression and accept it for what it is, we can then use it to then create a new identity for ourselves. Who do we want to become? And this is why I think this part of life is fantastic. Although often what you might see is sometimes people can let the past define them. And we can get stuck in this period of reflection, perhaps blaming other people for our shortcomings. They certainly don't define us. But often I find that these experiences, we can use them to have a great impact in the world later on. What I've also learned through the podcast is that our deepest pain can end up becoming our biggest purpose. So a lot of people have experienced a lot of pain when they were younger and dealt with the pain and dedicated this time to working on themselves. They've ended up going out through the other side, and now they can teach other people. Now they can spread their light to the world. So I think it's overall a very positive process, this period of your life. But again, you can get stuck there. I know Jamin talked about 3 parts of life, where you have the first part, which is all identified with the egoic mind, the egoic wants, where it's success, money, we've got to strive. And it's only when you get the wake-up call, you then fall into the second phase, which is this shadow work era, where you're working on yourself. And he even alluded to this as well. You can get stuck there. And it's only when you work through that, you can then go on to the third phase, which is enlightenment, purpose. You're feeling fantastic. And I actually spoke with my grandma recently, and she suggested there's perhaps a 4th phase after that, where you're kind of just in a reflection state. You're not really striving for anything anymore. You're kind of just content. And I think that's quite an interesting way of seeing it. But I think naturally we go through these parts of life, and I don't actually think we stay in one phase forever necessarily. From my understanding and talking with guys, you can go through multiple wake-up calls throughout your life, multiple parts in your life where you're reinventing yourself. And I think all of these can have great benefits at different points in time if we allow ourselves to feel. And this is why the feeling is so important, because as I've seen time and time again in my conversations with men, this is where we find out that actually what was driving us to make our decisions before. In the first phase, when we're going after success, we're going after something. Is that really what we wanted, or is it what we thought we wanted based on what society or our parents told us to do? It's just fascinating, and this is why we've got to allow ourselves to feel. It ties in with addiction too. I've had the privilege of speaking to many guys and girls on the podcast, experts in their fields, about addiction. What I was alluding to before was the standard approach to addiction is to numb our feelings. We don't want to feel these emotions, let's push it away. But we're on this earth for a limited period of time. Why not feel the depths of human emotion? We're not going to get this opportunity again. And it's by allowing yourself to feel, which can seem very, very scary and rebellious, because it's not in our nature to stop and feel. But when you do that, that's when you get the answers, when you allow yourself to feel your emotions. I never really taught myself to regulate my emotions. So for a long time, I would bottle it all up, and that would just lead to anger, resentment. And so this is why it's so important. When you give yourself permission to feel, you start crying, and that's beautiful, and it's so healthy, and it's good for you. But we need to allow ourselves to do that. And on that point of addiction, sometimes we stay addicted because of the shame that we feel. It's a big emotion for men, shame. But it doesn't do anything for you. A lot of guys who I've spoken to spoke about shame and said how pointless it was, and how what helped them was actually speaking about it, speaking with other men, finding good men in their lives who they can speak to about this stuff. And there's no reason to be shameful. Shame thrives in secrecy. And so if you've ever got something that's on your mind and you don't like it, you've got to find safe men. You've got to find safe people you can talk about it with, because that's when it completely evaporates and you can work through it, and you can start thinking about, okay, let's feel this, let's understand it, and now let's think about who is the person that I want to become. It's always forward looking. That's why I like this approach of coming up with an identity, the way in which you want to interact with the world, and putting that at the forefront of your mind rather than just focusing just on the pain, just on the past. It's very important to feel, dedicating time to feel the emotions, but then, okay, where are we going after? How can we use this experience to better our lives, to learn from it? And this is where the responsibility piece comes in as well. It's very easy to project onto our surroundings, oh, they're the reason I'm this way, and yeah, fuck this guy. But when we don't take responsibility for our actions, that's where we can get stuck and we don't grow, because no one else is going to change your life, only you are. And so if you're always looking outwards and blaming your circumstances on the world around you, it's not very empowering, and you won't be able to go deeper within yourself. This is what you see in society as a collective, just blaming other people, but we're not going to make progress that way. And on the feeling aspect, I was very privileged to speak to quite a few guys now on anxiety. Magnus Davies, Asaf Oz, where they talk about anxiety and our perception of anxiety. And it's so clear to me now that anxiety, again, it's our relationship with it. We can't always get rid of it, but that's the issue. We're trying to get rid of these feelings because they're uncomfortable. But when we sit with them, it's often the fear that is worse than the experience of feeling it itself. And when we understand anxiety at its core, that's when we can get more answers. All the answers are there. And we realize that a lot of fear that is ruling our decisions, it's just fear. It's not a real thing. It's the fear itself, not the actual thing that's scaring you. Hopefully I haven't lost you there, but you see my point. Highly recommend checking out those episodes. But essentially it's communicating with us. It's a part of us that doesn't feel safe. And another thing I've learned is that a lot of pain is actually stored in our body over time. So when we react to something when we were younger, we form a small trauma response in our body. That's still there. That doesn't leave. We need to sort of get that out of us, right? And it's only by feeling and allowing ourselves to lean into these difficult emotions, these sensations in our body, that we can then use that, alchemize it, and move forward with our lives. And part of this journey of moving forwards is not only discovering what identity you want to have, but then also the types of people that you want to have in your life. On quite a few episodes now, James Rowdy wicked episode on sort of breaking out of the old version of you, moving into the new. And this process of changing your surroundings, it can be very challenging. Jay Staniforth as well talks about this, where it's very difficult to change when all the people around you know you for who you are, right? And they're comfortable knowing who you are in their mind. So when you suddenly start to change, they're mourning. I know Jodie touched upon this as well in our episode. They're mourning the person that you used to be, their version of you in their mind. And it's very difficult when we don't change our environment to continue changing. I've definitely spoken to people who have managed to do that, but it's trickier. There's this energy bond that was formed, right? So you can imagine if you've been living a lie beforehand, before you've had your wake-up call, and you've made friends, they would have been drawn to you based off of your energy. You formed an energy bond with them, right? And if you weren't necessarily in a great place then, even if you thought you were, that bond is going to be threatened then because you're operating at a different frequency now, and they will subconsciously try and pull you back down to that level, to the level that they're at, so they can see you. And you got to remember, often we were kind of living a lie before this depressive episode, before this wake-up call, because we haven't been the fullest expression of ourselves. And if you haven't been authentic, then what does that say about the people you've been hanging about with? Even if they've been authentic, if you haven't been authentic to yourself, you haven't got genuine connections in your life. And so this is something to consider as well. And often, if you formed these relationships with people who perhaps haven't been expressive, where you haven't been the real you, if you tell them something vulnerable, this is what you see with a lot of guys, when they try and be vulnerable in front of other guys, it's been met with a bit of resistance, right? They'll try and change the subject, or they won't really take it seriously. And why would they, right? If they haven't been there, if they haven't been to that dark place themselves, if they're not a deep thinker, they're not going to relate to you. And this is where the responsibility comes in as well. You can't change other people. That's just the way they are. So we must take responsibility and ask ourselves, okay, why am I still attracted to these types of people who can't hold space for me? Well, perhaps it's because you can't hold space for yourself. The quality of your relationships will improve as I believe you do more work on yourself. Naturally, as you go through that process, I believe you'll attract people into your life who will understand you. A big part of the process is actually finding new connections and reinventing yourself and finding people who you can be yourself with. For me, it was Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and pro wrestling. When I went to those, when I met people with aligned interests and I could just be myself, that was very healing. That was a very healing process when you find your people. Finding safe men who will listen to you and who will call you forward to become a better man is a huge part of the man's journey. That said though, I do believe this lonely chapter is almost like a rite of passage for the man, where they've decided that they want to leave their old life behind, the friendship circle, the habits, whatever it may be, and they've got a vision of where they want to go, but they're kind of stuck in that middle phase, that in-between phase. And I imagine a lot of men listening to this will be in that middle phase. And I do wonder if there is a place to say, yeah, like this is a part of your life where things are going to be a bit lonely. You are going to do a bit more introspection, but perhaps that is the rite of passage to get to where you want to be, right? And this is why listening to these types of podcasts can be super helpful. Joining communities too of growth, like-minded men, and they are out there. You've just got to trust that process, and faith is an important part of this. You've got to have faith that things are going to work out, because they are. Doesn't matter what phase of life you're going through, things will always work out. Sometimes it will take a lot of time. A lot of the guys who have gone through difficult challenges and end up building a dream life for themselves, a life where they're working towards their own goals. Mike Bauer, a great example, where he left a 9-to-5, became a DJ after going through a lot of introspection and challenges. He did get that, but he did stress that it does take a lot of time. And this is the thing with these long-term goals, and especially men, ambitious men. We want the thing, we want to build this amazing life for ourselves, but it doesn't come overnight. You see these success stories overnight. And it's just, no, that's just not how it works. Often it is the long-term process, and you've got to be in it for a long-term game. And this is where, again, the faith aspect is hugely important. Just having faith that it is going to work out, and you've got the support of beings, an entity, the universe, God, whatever it may be. You've got that, and I think cultivating that is actually a big part of the men's journey. And this is what I've been super fascinated by. And it ties back in with our egoic mind as well. A lot of the time, the reason why depression is so difficult at first is because we're so identified with our thoughts. We can't detach from them. And this is why a big part of the process is understanding that we are not our thoughts, and we can separate ourselves from our thoughts. And this is why practices like meditation are super helpful, because once you understand fundamentally, and this is just what's helped me, but also the other guys on the podcast, once you understand that we are a soul, we're a being in a human suit, you're not your thoughts, you can separate yourself from your thoughts, and you realize that there's more to us underneath that. I think that can be very helpful. I think this is a big part of the journey as well. Once you understand that all of your thoughts have just been an accumulation of your subjective experiences of the world. And so the way you perceive things, the way you perceive your life, friendships, work, whatever it may be, these are all based off your belief system, and your belief system can be rewired. This is why it's so powerful, this work that we're doing, because you realize that your belief system can always be changing. It can always be evolving. And what you believe is possible, what you believe about your own sense of self-worth, that's just a belief system. It's not always reality. And a lot of the time, I think the reason why people struggle to leave depression or struggle to navigate these times in particular is because they believe like that's it, that's reality, and it's got to stay that way. It doesn't. It can be rewired. This is why this work's really powerful. And tying in the spirituality aspect, when you understand that okay, and this is the huge point. This is a huge point, I believe, because once you start to see challenges, you see them as, okay, these are challenges which have been gifted to me so I can go on to the next phase of my spiritual journey. And when you see life that way, it doesn't mean the challenging times don't happen. Of course they do. We're always going to get different seasons of life, different challenges. But once you understand that the challenges are there for a reason, and on the other side of those challenges is another level to unlock in your own journey, in your own growth, you can change your perception of the challenges. We can't get rid of the challenges, but we change our perception of them. And this is where I believe your overall relationship with life can really shift, and it can be really powerful. And this can form a really great relationship with something bigger than yourself, the universe, God, whatever you want to call it. I do believe it's an important part of the man's journey that we cultivate. Once you understand that there's more to life than ourselves, that we're so much bigger and wider than what we are, that's where things can be very optimistic, I believe. I do believe we have to meet the universe halfway, right? And it's important to have faith. It's important to have this relationship with something greater than yourself. I also don't think it's going to happen by itself. I think we've got to meet the universe halfway. We've got to take action in order to make things happen. And if there's anything I've learned from this podcast, is that sometimes it's just one step. Just do one thing that can take you one step closer to whatever your goals may be. And this is a good point, talking about goals. This is something I'm fascinated by, because we can get very attached to goals. It's something I'm really exploring. But when we get so attached to a goal, I think this can almost trigger depression again, when those goals aren't realized, or that goal seems very far away, and it can create this gap where we are not quite where we want to be yet, and the gap between who we think we are and where we want to be is too big. And I think that resistance can cause a lot of pain as well. And I love what Jay said in our episode about them not being goals, but they're milestones, because goal implies that you've finished something, you've completed something. And often this is where the sense of identity can come in as well, because when you have tied your whole identity to achieving a goal, what happens when you achieve the goal? You're going to have another wake-up call. So this is why learning to detach from goals has been super important for a lot of the guys I've spoken to. And often, especially when we've sort of gone through a healing process and we found our purpose, right? Purpose can imply many different things for many people. I'm talking about it here in a career sense or something that you're working towards. It ties in with the first lesson of learning to listen to our body, listen to the emotions that is coming up. And burnout has been a huge theme. Almost all the guys I've spoken to have experienced burnout at some point. And often it's because they haven't listened to their body, right? They haven't slowed down. They've been having coffee, and I can relate to this, having coffee at 9 a.m., 11 a.m., and then 2 p.m., 3 p.m. It's where it gets a bit ridiculous, not listening to the body, not slowing down, not taking mindful breaks from work. In my life, it's certainly been a blessing when I've experienced burnout, because it means, again, tying it back in with depression, you're forced to slow down. Now you can build stronger foundations. So it all goes back to listening to your body. And I believe you can still work hard while still having boundaries in place for yourself, looking after yourself, listening to your body, slowing down. I don't believe the two are mutually exclusive. I always used to think, right, you've got to hustle, hard work's important, you can't take any breaks. But no, like there is a way in which you can do both. And we've talked a fair bit, especially in recent episodes, of how aligning your energy to the process and making sure that's aligned can lead to better outcomes and not leading to burnout. So I know for myself, for example, still work hard, absolutely. But I think hustle culture in and of itself has been glorified. I'm sure it works for some people, but the way I like to look at it is sort of life satisfaction. And my conversation with Jamin, again, was very profound. Highly recommend checking it out, because he talked about how we're all looking to hustle and build a business that scales. But why not build a business that scales your life, not a life that scales your business? Because when you stay within what's comfortable for you and you're not pushing yourself and constantly working over your edge, you can let things expand naturally. And this has been a really tough concept for me to understand. And I could feel the resistance for myself, learning to slow down and not overexert myself. But when I have slowed down, I've got so much more clarity. I'm reflecting a lot more on where I'm going in life. And as the saying goes, if you're on the wrong train, the sooner you get off it, the better. And I think that can apply in many areas of life. And I think when we get so attached to a goal or a mission, we can lose sight of the fundamentals, the important pieces. And I think we can avoid these tough times by slowing down and reflecting in our process, taking the time to reflect on our week, reflect on our day, what didn't we get done, what's not quite right in our lives currently. And when we give ourselves that time to reflect, we can change course. We can, rather than just keep on going all the time without reflecting, then another wake-up call, and then a big, massive reset, which is still a blessing, by the way. But why not just avoid that in the first place, if you can, by just taking steps, learning from the lessons. This is a huge theme in the podcast. Learn from the lessons, because when you don't learn from the lessons, you're going to keep on repeating them. The universe is going to give you the same lessons over and over and over again until you've really learnt them. So if you're constantly getting burnout, then you're not learning from the lessons. That's a great example and something I can relate to myself. But again, it comes back to your relationship with the challenging times. When you set an intention as a man who wants to really make a difference in the world and make a difference in your life, when you set this intention to the universe, to the world, you're going to be gifted these challenges. And it's only through these challenges that you build the character traits to become the man you want to be. I believe there's certain stuff like discipline, resilience, grit. No one can teach you that. You have to live through it yourself. So again, if you're going through challenging times, if you're being met with resistance, your prayers have been answered. Okay, cool. This is the rite of passage. Go through it. And when you go through hard things over and over and over again, no one can take that away from you. And this is how I believe you build up confidence. It's by doing the hard things and becoming the man who you want to be, not by simply learning through textbooks or through other people. I do believe we can learn a lot from other people, but we can have to live through the lessons ourselves. It's happened time and time again on the podcast when I've batch recorded episodes, and 2 to 3 months later, I'm reviewing it before we publish it, and I'm like, wow, this guy is talking about the lessons that he's learned, and I'm going through that same lesson right now. So I clearly don't even learn the lessons half the time, because you've got to experience it yourself and understand it, that feeling in your body. Otherwise, it's going to go in one ear, out the other. And this is why now I really pay attention and listen to people. But even then, sometimes I'll have to go through it myself. But it's so clear to me now that being still is where we get a lot of the answers. James Grandstrom had him on the podcast. Highly recommend checking out that episode where he talks about the power of the mind and how slowing down can have such a huge beneficial impact in our lives. And it makes sense. Aaron Timms was an episode that really kickstarted my curiosity for this theme, the power of the mind. The mind is so powerful. James and Aaron talks about this a lot in their episodes, and a lot of the other guys alluded to it as well. It's all in the mind. Everything we know, everything we believe we're capable of, healing, the way we heal, we can literally heal diseases in our body because of the mind. It's fascinating. And the best way I believe we can live a peaceful life is by not only slowing down and listening to the signs and paying attention to them, but then also being aware of how fundamental the mind is in everything. Our belief system, the way we see the world, even healing diseases, healing parts of our body. It's just amazing. And so we've got to be really careful about what's going into our minds. Treat it like our body in the same way that we won't consume foods that are particularly bad for us because we know that it's going to make us feel a certain way, in the same way that we might not attempt something dangerous because it could injure our body. In the same way, we've got to be very careful of what we're actually letting into our mind, because all these experiences, all the stuff we look at on social media, all this stuff plays a huge part in our belief system. And so we've got to nourish our mind as much as we can. A big theme I've seen in the podcast is how the shift has gone from chasing the highs in the first phase of life, chasing the highs all the time, to just going towards that middle zone, that peace. And that peace is what we're really striving for. I believe now that we can do that by looking for a life of alignment rather than looking to hustle our way through that. Pushing our limits all the time because that's the only way to do things. This is a brief overview of all the different themes and concepts. I find that through chatting with people, I not only learn from their stories, but I learn a lot about myself too. For those who aren't aware, you can find us on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and of course, YouTube too, at the Growth Voyage Podcast. And if you have any questions that you would want to ask any of our guests, we ask our guests at the end of each episode a question from one of the Growth Voyage listeners. So feel free to send them our way. I'll see you next time.